Sorry guys, video's canceled. Flins got nervous. Oh, wait, I can make double Flins in my intro. Let me sit down. Yes! Thank you. Hello. And, excuse me, sir. Excuse me. You're not supposed to be there. I guess we'll just have to record around the puffin. This video is really off to a great start. Hello. This video is going to turn out a little bit different from my other recent 101s, because Flins is not a type of unit that I'll traditionally make a 101 for. He's an on-fielder, and he's a fairly restrictive one at that, but over the past few months of playing him, I've grown a big appreciation for Flins, and I've made my fair share of observations about him, but it's split across like 10 different videos. So I figured this is a good opportunity, just get all my thoughts in one place. This is my definitive Flins video. So welcome to Flins 101. Oh, wait, I had an ad read to do. Hey, are you spending money on Genesis crystals without using LD Shop? What is wrong with you? LD Shop is a website that uses regional differences in Genesis crystal pricing to effectively get you discounts on your crystals. If you're buying Genesis crystals, this just saves you money. There's no reason you shouldn't be doing this. It doesn't even ask for your account information, just the server you play on and your UID. It is safe, it is cheaper than Hoyo's official top-up channels, and LD Shop offers basically anything you could buy, along with guarantees for characters. So if you want to pick up a guarantee for Flins and his brand new boyfriend who's coming out this banner, if you had planned to top up regularly, lucky you, save a little bit of money. Using my link in the description or in the pinned comment, you can get up to additional 15% off with a few other extra discounts for first-time buyers. You play more than just Genshin? Well, LD Shop has more than just Genshin. Oh, it's got Fortnite. I didn't even know it had Fortnite. Oh my god, wait, there's guides. There's pulling guides. I didn't even realize all these things were here. You can unlock special coupons, as well as a free monthly pass to a game of your choice by spending enough money in a month. Wow, look at all these cool services. If you're a spender who is looking to pick up Flins, LD Shop is the service for you. Thank you to LD Shop. Let's take a look at Flins' basic kit. Now, I assume that you're already familiar with Lunar Charged. It's been in the game for about half a year now. Multiple units can contribute, it takes your crit into account, yada yada. If you really want more details, you can look at my bineffa video. I go a little bit more in depth about Lunar Charged there. But for the most part, converting Electro Charged into Lunar Charged isn't that big of a deal. It's essentially balanced to even out your electrocharged procs. Electrocharge teams have a lot of different characters applying a lot of different elements at different rates, and therefore your trigger for the electrocharge reaction can change a lot. And Lunar Charged working as it does, taking all of your units who applied an element into account, and then afterwards calculating an instance of damage, just makes it a lot more consistent. It smooths out your damage from reactions. It has that same base damage increase that every other lunar reaction unit gives, and just like every other lunar unit, it is a powerful passive that you do probably want to max out, but you don't have to try very hard to do so. Flins' normal build paths often end up giving him over 2000 attack, which is where this passive caps out. Just like the other lunar units, he doesn't get affected by damage bonus, so you use attack percent goblets. That makes it even easier for him to hit those numbers. At this point, I'm pretty much just repeating what I've said about bineffa, but would you believe it, they're really similar units. Flins teams in general set themselves up pretty well to deal reasonable Lunar Charged reaction damage. There are a few interesting supportive things that Lunar Charged can do. Like I mentioned in my bineffa video, it can make it so that units with little to no crit can have a much easier time proccing fav weapons, but usually it's just a small source of extra damage in your Flins teams. First editing Mies interjection, nice and early on this one. While Lunar Charge doesn't really change how you want to be gearing your units, because Flins teams actually get a decent amount of their damage from the Lunar Charge reaction, Flins is one of the rare attack scaling units that you actually do want to consider level 90ing for that increase in the base damage of his reactions. Still not as high value as HP or defense scalers, but he's higher than most other attack scalers. So let's get into the actual rest of the kit. His active talents. Normals are worthless. You can completely ignore them. His skill is a lot more impactful, but as you may have noticed, it's still not the most important thing to level. As you've probably guessed by my talent levels, the large majority of Flins' damage is coming from his burst. The reason his skill is important is that it is a means to access his burst. By default, Flins has a pretty normal 80 cost burst. By using it, you'll get your regular 5-star burst animation, and he'll equal to 2 instances of small lunar charge damage, followed by 1 instance of larger lunar charge damage. It does look like 2 separate pillars, but if we check in the menu, he deals 2 instances of middle phase and 1 instance of final phase, so we have 2 30% multipliers and 1 210% multiplier. This multiplier looks a little bit small. Of course, as most of you probably know by this point, it's not actually that small. Because it is considered lunar charge damage, it gets a bunch of extra bonuses, including a 3 times multiplier that they just don't want to tell us about. It ignores defense, and of course I have to say, defense and elemental resistance are not the same thing. That's why you still bring res shredders to his teams, but characters like Lisa, who have defense shreds. This is a different stat from res shred, and it will not affect Flins' lunar charge damage. Lunar reaction damage, of course, has that same thing that all other lunar damage has going on, where it is unaffected by elemental damage bonus. Instead, it effectively gets damage bonus from EM because it is considered a reaction. So building EM increases your lunar charged damage, yada yada. You probably get it by now. So yeah, these multipliers, they look low, but they're a lot higher than they seem. But hold on, what is this? After his regular burst information, there seems to be a little bit extra. That is, of course, because Flins has a second burst. By using his skill once, he will go into the state where he gets infused normal attacks. These infused normals get entirely new scaling. They're not based on the scaling of his base normal attacks, so this is why you really ignore his normal attack talent entirely, because if you want to increase the damage of these strikes, you level his skill, not his normals. In any case, it infuses his normal attacks. It also gives him a second skill, Northland Spear Storm, which after using, he gets access to this second burst. It is a much faster animation. It costs far less energy, 30 compared to 80 of his big burst, and you have enough time to do 2 of them within your skill state. His big burst is on a 20-second cooldown. Even if you wanted to use it just once a rotation, you physically couldn't, because Flins rotates faster than 20 seconds. And while we can't compare lunar charge multipliers to regular electro multipliers fairly, we can compare them to each other, because yes, this mini burst also deals lunar charge damage. Additionally, both of these bursts get further enhanced under 2 conditions. Number 1, if he's an Ascendant Moongleam, and number 2, if there are thunderclouds created by the lunar charged reaction nearby. His big burst actually gets a pretty small increase from these conditions being met, going from 2 small instances of damage and 1 large to 4 small instances of damage and 1 large, increasing the multiplier on a crown burst from about 270 lunar charge damage to 330 lunar charge damage. Not a crazy increase, but certainly a noticeable one. The small burst is much more affected. At a baseline, the small burst only has 1 hit, but the empowered version gets an entire second hit that is stronger than the first one. This more than doubles the damage of the mini burst and pretty much puts it on par with the big burst, going from 128% lunar charge damage, adding on this additional 187%, you get around 320, 330%. So it comes out much faster, it costs less than half the energy, you can fit 2 within your rotation, and if you meet his conditions, it does about the same damage as the big burst. In practice, this means that Flins very, very rarely uses his big burst. Now, note that I didn't say never, it's just rare. So there's your basic rundown of his kit. His normals really don't do anything at all. His skill is useful, but it's mostly useful just to access his mini burst, which is where most of his damage is going to be coming from. Before I continue on to more stuff, I should probably address the talent situation here, because while I leveled my Flins' talents like this, you probably shouldn't. I mean, yeah, you should ignore the normal attacks. Those don't do anything for you. But you probably can get some actual good value out of leveling his skill. While his infused normals don't do that much damage, and his skill is mostly just a way to access his real damage, they don't do nothing. They're definitely worth a little bit of investment. He still builds attack, he still builds crit. His normal attacks are affected by those stats. He's getting electro res shredded in his teams, and his normal attacks benefit from that. So it can be worth it to level it up at these lower levels, maybe to level 4, 5, or 6, because truly, it doesn't cost a lot of resources. At those lower levels, when the resource cost is as low as it is, I would probably recommend that most people level their Flynn skill at least to level 2, if anything. A good target is around the 4 to 6 range. I wouldn't think it's worth spending golden books or boss mats on, but his skill can be a real source of damage in his teams, especially his lower investment teams. In fact, I recently did an Abyss stream where I was playing with some scuffed Flynn's teams in this Abyss, and multiple times I got very, very, very close to killing the Panther dog boss, whatever it is, before it got a second shield phase, and doing something like leveling Flynn's skill would have been enough to make that difference and kill this boss without it getting a second shield phase. The reason I keep my Flynn skill at level 1 is because it's funny. Okay, onto the Ascension passives. They make him deal more damage. Ascension 1 straight up gives him 20% Lunar Charge damage bonus. Ascension 2 basically does the same thing because it gives him EM, and that's what EM is doing on his teams. It's giving him Lunar Charge damage bonus. Just like his base damage passive, this caps out at 2000 attack, so it's going to be pretty easy to max out on a normal build for him. Now we go to artifacts, and as soon as we have started, we are already done. Use Night Sky. Don't use anything else. Use Night Sky. Now, some of you may be having thoughts right now. Well, if Flins gets his mini burst by using his special skill in his infused state, what about increasing the amount of skills he can get in that state? What about reducing the cooldown of that special skill? Fun thought, but Hoyo says no. If you wanted to try using Thundering Fury on him to reduce that skill cooldown, get more bursts out, get a lot more damage out. I've seen people try to use Thundering Fury. Sadly, it just doesn't work because his skill explicitly disallows it. So while that's a fun thought, we can't use it, and we just use Night Sky. Pretty much no other set competes. Technically, there are sets that you can make work on him, like Maru Shosei, but the conditions for Night Sky are very easy to meet for him, and they give him so many stats. 80 EM increases both the reaction Lunar Charge damage and the talent Lunar Charge damage. Then the 4-piece, if you're meeting your Ascendant Gleam requirements, which I hope you are, set gives 30% crit rate to him and 10% lunar reaction damage bonus to the entire team. Not only does this increase his own Lunar Charge talent damage, it increases the reaction damage coming from the rest of the team. It increases the Lunar Charge talent damage that may be coming from any other units on the team. It is a full party damage buff, and as we are going to go over, Flins has a lot of teams where he cares about those. He has a lot of teams where you have multiple units contributing significant damage, and those teams benefit a ton from full party buffs. Night Sky gives you a small one of those while also tacking on a lot of nice extra stats for Flins in particular. It also looks good on him, so fashion impactors, you don't have an excuse. When it comes to weapons, Flins is pretty simple. If you have a 5-star stat stick, throw it on him and it'll probably work. If you don't have one of those, the Battle Pass weapons are good options. A lot of 5-star polearms give pretty generic stats that Flins cares about. Calamity, Homa, and Vortex all just give a bunch of attack, obviously good. He's an attack scaler. Engulfing Lightning and Skyward Spine both give a good amount of damaging stats along with a fresh amount of ER, which we are going to talk about. He does have some ER needs, but these can be functional options on him. A couple of these other weapons are a little bit more conditional. Scarlet Sands is a weapon that gives attack based on your character's EM stat, which those are both good damaging stats for Flins, so that sounds really good, but it does require you to hit with your character's skill 3 times to get the full effect. Flins just doesn't do that. The initial cast of his skill doesn't do any damage, and then you only get 2 follow-up skills that you do to access his mini burst. This can potentially be solved by his C1, which reduces the cooldown of his special skill to 4 seconds, allowing him to get 3 mini bursts, but I don't know how many people would pull C1 Flins just to enable a weapon that wasn't his signature on him. In any case, Staff of Scarlet's Hands is fine, but it doesn't have great uptime and you can't access the full effect. I'd use Primordial Jadewing Spear. It is one of his better stat sticks, especially with Refines, which can be realistic to get because it's a standard weapon. If you noticed, I myself have R2, and then his Sig is his Sig. It gives a bunch of damaging stats to him. It gives him some energy. So like I mentioned, he has energy needs, and this weapon pretty much mostly fulfills them. In the proper teams with his signature, he has very, very, very low energy needs. But yeah, those are the 5 stars. If you don't have one of those, you can consider a battle pass weapon, just like bineffa. Ballad of the Fjords and Deathmatch are very, very close to one another. So if you already have one at a high refine, just use that one. If you have both at a high refine, or if you're looking to pick one up, you don't have either, go for Deathmatch. The attack given by Deathmatch's passive is better than the EM given by Ballad's passive because EM has actual diminishing returns. The more EM you stack, the less reaction damage bonus you get from each point of EM. That's not how it works with attack. Every point of attack is worth the same as every other point of attack, no matter how much you have. For that reason, Deathmatch generally pulls ahead by a very tiny bit, but they're extremely close to one another. If you don't have any 5 stars, if you don't have any battle pass weapons, well, you're in luck because Flins has a perfect custom free-to-play option sitting right there for you in the crafting menu. And I have to open it up because I've never actually made one. Prospector's Shovel. It's not a shovel. I don't know why it's called that. Medium base attack, attack percent substat, gives you a bunch of lunar charge damage bonus in the passive. Not really much to comment on. It's just all good stats. Whether you have a newer account and you're just looking for weapons that function, or you're more invested, you want your Flins to deal more damage, he is not lacking in options at all. The final weapon option is kind of gonna bring me to another point entirely, and I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about it because it's not the most relevant, but it's complicated, so I am gonna have to spend a long time talking about it. Is Fav. This is not a recommendation, you probably shouldn't be putting him on Fav, but Flins' properties lead him to have some interesting synergy with the extra particles that Fav generates. The reason I was so attracted to Flins as a character is that he has similar energy mechanics as our beloved boy, Sethos. Sethos has 2 ways of using his energy in his burst and his charged attacks. In general, his burst is far better when it comes to converting energy to damage. The damage that you get from his burst is far more efficient for the energy that it costs than his charge attacks. But they're not mutually exclusive. If you build enough energy recharge, you can use both. And it's often worth it to do so. It's often worth it to throw a little bit of extra energy recharge on Sethos so that you can do a few charge attacks at the end of your rotation and squeeze more damage out of him. Flins has a very similar mechanic between his big and small burst. Granted, Flins' numbers are stacked in a way where I think the intent is for him to just never use his big burst, but there's nothing stopping us. You can build Flins in a way to do his regular rotation, get your 2 mini bursts, and still have enough energy to do a big burst at the end of it all. Now, there are a lot of caveats to this, and it doesn't work nearly as smoothly as it does with Sethos. Number 1, of course I mentioned, his burst is on a 20-second cooldown, his skill is on a 16-second cooldown, which is usually what his rotations are gated by. Oh, perfect, I just got everything that I need to fully equip my mannequin in a butler outfit. Actually, hold on. He kind of looks like Flins now. Additionally, Flins' big burst comes at a much higher cost than Sethos' charge shots, 20 energy versus 80 energy. He also just generates less energy in general. It can be difficult to get enough ER on Flins to big burst consistently, and even if you manage to get enough ER where big bursting every rotation would be possible, his cooldown just says no. So this isn't really something you can reliably do, which is why I said I didn't want to talk about it for too long. It's a little bit more of a gimmick thing, limited to much higher energy recharge builds and Fav if you want to do that to him. And of course with Fav, even though you are getting the extra multipliers from the big burst, you're losing a lot of other damaging stats that other weapons can give. So it is a cool energy dynamic, but it's not really one that Flins can take advantage of unless he's an AoE. I haven't really mentioned this, but Flins is kind of a demon in AoE content. He has a massive hit of AoE damage that centers upon himself that is incredibly easy to control. He is great at dealing with multiple enemies and often doesn't even require a grouper to do that particularly well. But There's another thing about AoE content that makes Flins even better. I'm just gonna hope that this clear that I had was Flins Premium, and look at that, it was. Not only is he just really, really good at hitting multiple enemies in AoE, but enemies drop energy particles. Upon reaching certain HP threshold, enemies will just generate particles and give your party energy. When you have multiple enemies all dropping particles for Flins, it becomes pretty easy to use his big burst and 2 mini bursts within a single rotation. I mean, this Abyss right here was basically custom made to shill him and bineffa, so it's showing off one of his major strengths in AoE. So I think that is mostly it for the base kit things that we have to talk about Flins, and that took longer than I expected because of the nuances with his burst. But the team section is probably going to be a fair bit shorter because of how restricted Flins is. As I kinda offhandedly mentioned, to get the enhanced version of his mini burst, which is where all of his damage is coming from, you need to be both in Ascendant Moongleam and you need to have lunar charged thunderclouds nearby. So Flins has restrictions for both a Nod Cry unit and a Hydra unit to be in his party. Additionally, he has a third unspoken restriction, a second Electro unit. Now this is for 2 reasons. Number 1, Flins teams often like to use VV shredders, of course in particular Sucrose. Other notable mentions, Lanyan, Lynette can be useful, Yehoda, certainly especially with constellations. In general, he likes running VV red shredders on his teams, and if you want to do that, you have to get Electro on your enemies before you swap into your VV unit, so you need off-field Electro to be applying so your VV unit can get their swirl. Additionally, his energy needs. Of course, Flins is a burst-reliant unit. To do a regular rotation of 2 mini bursts, he needs at least 60 energy to be generated. He doesn't generate a ton of particles on his own, so if he's the only Electro unit, his ER needs can get upwards of 150, 180 even. By adding a second Electro unit, not only do you get their particles, but you unlock Electro Resonance. Gives you an extra electro particle upon triggering reactions, 5-second cooldown. This means about 3 extra particles across your rotations. These 2 things do so much for Flins' energy needs. Without another Electro unit, he basically needs to be run on an ER Sans. With that second Electro, I have easily been able to function at just 115 energy recharge. Very few substat rolls. You can build so much more damage on him with the extra energy given by a second Electro and Electro Resonance. And of course that goes the same way for that second Electro. Fischl's not really important because her burst doesn't matter a ton. But of course for a unit like bineffa, Flins' best in slot support, she likes her burst. It gives an EM buff. It's pretty good. So there we have all 3 of Flins' effective restrictions. You need a Hydra unit to trigger Lunar Charge, you need an Electro unit to give you extra particles, and one of the units on your team needs to be a Nod Cry unit. Now, despite these restrictions, he still has a fairly wide range of teams, which is why I've come to appreciate him so much. And the first one I'm going to talk about is, yeah, it's going to be the boring one. I don't know what you expected. I mean, it's a good team. It's a strong team. I don't know what much more I could say about it, other than I can pretty easily hit 130, 140k DPS without playing that well, without paying that much attention. Those are crazy numbers and are good enough for most of the content in the game. In fact, probably too good for most of the content in the game. And of course, because some people are going to want to see the funny haha breakdown, yeah, Flins is only 44% of this team's damage. For those wondering, yes, I was swapping back to Sucrose after Flins in the rotation because that is what you do for optimal damage in this team. Columbina and bineffa make up so much of the team's damage that refreshing VV for both of them ends up being what's optimal. Oh, and I'm not even using TTDS here. I usually run TTDS on Sucrose. Frankly, I don't think I have that much to say about this team. I actually don't really play it all too often. I don't enjoy it that much. I don't know what it is. Just something about Columbina with Lunar Charge doesn't feel that satisfying to me. but it's obviously a good team. I just wanted to bring this up because this is one of the highest DPS teams in the game. It is up there with Nefer and the harder to do Mawika stuff, but it is notably easier than those two. Not only is your damage not wholly concentrated on your on-fielder, but your on-fielder's combos don't really matter that much anyways. This is one of my favorite things about Flins, because pretty much all of his damage is coming from his mini bursts and not his infused normal attacks. He's kind of free to do whatever he wants in between mini bursts. He can dodge around, he can just straight up run away from enemies. Not only are his mechanics extremely easy to execute, but he positions himself as a unit who has uniquely strong defensive capabilities on field. He doesn't really care about getting interrupted, so he doesn't really need a shield. He can afford to dodge around because his normal combos don't do a lot of damage, so he doesn't even necessarily need a healer. This is basically to say that while bineffa does provide a very powerful sub DPS, a little bit of a buffer, and a strong defensive option in Flins teams, I ultimately do think that she is a luxury that you probably want to get if you are a long-term Flins player, if you really want to be playing Flins into a lot of different content, if you play Flins a lot. Both the damage and the comfort provided by bineffa are very, very nice, but I find that in most content, Flins doesn't really need either. He can be perfectly comfortable with no defensive option at all, and often him and his teams do enough damage to clear comfortably anyways. It's really only the highest levels of Stygian that necessitate these best in slot teams. So unless you are entirely focused on clearing the higher levels of Stygian, which generally, I would advise against making that your primary goal on Genshin. The point of Stygian is to always have extremely high level shill for whatever is on banner, so their goal is to get you to pull everything. Needless to say, I don't think that's a very sustainable account goal. And outside of Stygian, these best in slot teams tend to matter a fair bit less and can be made up with by better play and creative team building. Yes, you're not going to be able to hit the same DPS that you see out of this team, but seriously, how much content in the game requires that level of DPS? If you're just looking for ways to increase your Flins team's damage just for the sake of itself, that's fine. You can pick up Columbina and bineffa for that reason. And in general, I would probably recommend prioritizing bineffa, but it's weird. Between Columbina and bineffa, I think bineffa is just straight up the better unit. And as evidenced by the length of my bineffa 101, she has a lot of other non-Flins contexts to be used in. The issue comes in where bineffa provides a much smaller increase over her counterparts than Columbina does for hers. Basically, Columbina has a lot less competition for the Hydro slot in Flins teams than bineffa has for the Electro slot. With the Hex buffs that came out a few patches ago, Fischl became even better because she needed it apparently. Not only does she deal crazy damage for a 1.0 off-field 4-star, not only does she generate insane amounts of particles, but she also buffs EM now. Upon triggering Electro Charge or Lunar Charge, you get 90 EM to herself and your on-fielder, boosted to 180 with her C6. So between the damage and the EM buff, she's kind of doing most of what bineffa does for Flins teams. She absolutely is doing it worse. She's not dealing as much damage as bineffa. She doesn't have the base damage increase for Lunar Charge damage in her kit. She doesn't bring the comfort of a shield, but she does fill the same role that bineffa does and brings a lot of strong competition. Meanwhile, Columbina's competition is Ino. I love Ino. I like Ino a lot. I think Ino is a great and fun unit. But Columbina is a lot better. Ino doesn't give a ton of buffs, and she was kind of designed around Nod Cry teams not having exceptionally competitive Hydro slots. She doesn't do any damage of her own, she pretty much just applies Hydro, and her buffs, they exist. 80 EM at C1 and 35% lunar reaction damage at C6. Funnily enough, these buffs can numerically be better than Columbina's buff, which maxes out at 40% reaction damage bonus with a crown burst. But Ino has the downside of not buffing full party. She only buffs your on-fielder with these buffs. Well, technically she gives herself 80 EM with this one, but this doesn't really matter. Columbina applies Hydro, has somewhat similar buffs to Ino, and also just does a fat load of damage herself. Oh, and yeah, her buff is full party, so it affects bineffa, and of course, bineffa is doing a lot of damage of her own on that team. Granted, unlike bineffa, Columbina doesn't have any quality of life that she brings to Flins teams. She's only damage. So let's just do some quick comparisons. One where we swap bineffa out for Official, and one where we swap Columbina out for Ino. I'm also actually lying a little bit because Columbina, of course, does bring a little bit of comfort to your teams if you put her on her signature weapon, but there's nothing inherently in her kit that gives any sort of quality of life changes. Of course, this isn't going to be a perfect comparison because this all depends on my own account, the strength of my artifacts, the strength of my characters, what weapon options and things I have on them. So take the numbers you see here with a small grain of salt. Columbina burst is getting annoying, so I'm going to turn on infinite energy. Depending on my exact performance, I'm getting a range from around 115 to 125 DPS. Okay, yeah, there we go. I'm hitting around 100k, almost even on the dot. This might actually be a team where I have bineffa on the new Morningstar set. I know that Tenacity used to be better, at least before this set came out. It might still be better in Flynn's team, specifically without Columbina. But you can see, obviously, worse performing team than the one that had Columbina and no bineffa. bineffa does provide you a smaller increase over Official than Columbina does compared to Ino, but I still would probably prioritize bineffa because of her flexibility as a unit and the comfort that she brings for Flynn's teams by giving a shield. Now, I did mention that Flynn's is absolutely fine without defensive options because of how his kit works. All his damage happens when he is literally invincible. So if you're fine without defensive utility and you don't think that you would use bineffa in any non-Flynn's teams, then absolutely go Columbina. She is the better option for your DPS. So I think I'm finally done talking about these two and how they relate to Flynn's. Although because most Flynn's teams play the same, I feel like I'm kinda done with the video. Not entirely. I still have a few other teams that I would like to show off. But in general, all Flynn's teams followed the same format that this one does. Flynn's, Hydra unit to activate Lunar Charge, off-field Electro to apply Electro and generate more particles, and Res Shredder. As long as you meet these conditions and you have another Nod Cry unit to meet Ascendant Moongleam, you're pretty much set, and you can get endless variations of these teams. So I'm just gonna kind of run over all your options in each slot. Starting with the Hydro slot, because it is the least contested, I feel like I have the least to say about it. Columbina is obviously the best. She does a lot of her own personal damage, she applies Hydro, she buffs lunar reaction damage for the entire team, especially if you have bineffa, she absolutely roids the hell out of Flynn's teams. Her application is centered on herself, which is generally pretty nice. A lot of people generally prefer it to circle impact, placing something on the ground that enemies have to stand within, but personally, I'm not fully convinced. It requires you to be near opponents, which, yes, generally you will be near opponents when you're fighting opponents. That's pretty self-evident. But because of what I mentioned, Flynn's is uniquely able to dodge and run around and not lose a lot of his personal DPS. I often find myself wanting to be away from enemies and I can lose my Hydro application. I'm kind of complaining for the sake of complaining because there really isn't much better Hydro application than this, and providing pretty good Hydra application while also providing all the damage and buffs that Columbina does is frankly just a lot more than I could have ever asked for. Maybe it's a little bit too much. In general, I kind of prefer Ino's application because yes, she is circle impact, but also it's a pretty big circle. It covers a wide amount of area. It's pretty difficult for enemies to walk outside of it. And also, I lied. She's not circle impact. At C2, Ino gets a coordinated attack with her burst, and that coordinated attack is not limited to her circle. It can escape just fine and apply enough hydro to keep full uptime on your thundercloud, which is all that Flins cares about. Which is also another interesting thing that I think leads to much more interesting team building with Flins. He doesn't require good hydro application off field because you don't repeatedly need to trigger any reactions. He just needs some. As long as you have enough hydro to trigger the thunderclouds, which last for about 6 seconds, then you're set. That is all Flins ever needs. Of course, triggering more reactions just gets you reaction damage, which isn't bad, but it's not strictly necessary for him to get his enhanced bursts. So you can even use a unit like Mona, who has pretty bad application off field. Because you already run Sucrose in a lot of Flins teams by default, she counts for half of your hex, so you're able to run all these different hex units and get different benefits out of them. Which is another reason why I like Flins' team building, is he works better with hex stuff. And hex stuff is cool and fun. That's why Fischl works so well in place of a Neffa. Yeah, okay. Rotations are definitely a little bit tight because Sucrose is removing some of the hydro going on. Upon testing it, yeah, rotations are definitely a little bit tight on getting the second hit on your second burst. It could potentially be better to go Sucrose into Mona, but then you're missing Res Shred, but I guess, you know, you'd rather lose out on your Res Shred than lose out on the second hit of your second burst. That's a lot more impactful. Oh wow, even then, when I did Mona second, she still didn't. It's inconsistent and very tight timing. You can get it to work. After playing this, I don't think I'm gonna recommend the Sucrose variation of it, but that's fine because we have another Hex Res Shredder. Ooh baby, yeah baby, aw yeah, aw swag. This is so weird. This is so weird. I swear to God I was able to get, I swear I was able to get good uptime. Oh, hold on. I think I remember the issue. I think this is, yeah, I think this is a me mistake. I think this is a me mistake. I think I forgot on Bona, you have to burst then skill to get enough hydro application to last you your full rotation. Ooh, alright, that works a little bit better. And the cloud is still up like a few seconds after I bursted, so yeah. I keep doing it by accident. My mistake. You need to burst and then skill on Mona to get that extended hydro application to actually be able to get both enhanced mini bursts. There we go. Alright, whatever. Oh my god, that's so funny. Durin dealing more damage in this team than Aneffa is. Probably due to the overload triggers that he's getting. And also, he's on Sig. And also, he's on Sig. To finish off talking about the Hydro slot, I mean, there's not really much more to talk about because of how little other units give Flins. Farina and Yelan's damage bonus buffs go unused because as a lunar character, can't use damage bonus. And Xingqiu doesn't give any sort of buffs, but he does have a 20-second cooldown on his burst and a 21-second cooldown on his skill. It is not impossible to use Xingqiu with Flins, but because of these cooldowns both being longer than Flins' rotations, you have to do the thing where you alternate which one you use. You burst one rotation and you skill the next rotation. So, my first rotation, only skill, swap to Sucrose. His orbitals have a little bit of innate Hydro application when you're touching enemies, so I keep my Hydro aura for this entire rotation. And then second rotation, uses Burst. Ah, I rotated too fast. Pretty simple. And then we do our third rotation. We go back to just using the skill. Xingqiu isn't really doing anything besides applying Hydro. He of course does have meaningful damage of his own, but because he's not getting his burst every rotation, he's only using it every other rotation, it cuts his damage potential down by a lot, so he should definitely be on a buffing set. In general, your Hydro slot in this team is going to be the one on Serenade, and Xingqiu is no different. If I actually properly geared him, he'd be on Serenade. And then all your other units pretty much just apply Hydro. Kokomi and Barbara can do a little bit of healing, bring some defensive utility there. Nilou can hold her signature, I guess. Oh, that's not her signature. Girl, what happened to you? Nilou could hold her signature, I guess, if you have it, as could Farina. Mona actually does provide decent buffs that I was not taking full advantage of. C4, 15 crit rate, that's a lot of stats, and my current Flins build has exactly 100 crit rate, so it's not making use of this, but if you build your Flins to make use of this, Mona can definitely be a better option, along with C2 gives EM, C1 gives Lunar Charge damage bonus. So she's certainly not a terrible option, especially when considering your other options, which kind of are terrible. The reason Ino is my favorite is simply because she is the easiest to use. She has a few extra buffs, which are nice, but frankly, those don't make a massive impact. In my opinion, she just has the best, easiest to access Hydro application. Columbina is of course better and has that Hydro application on her skill, but I think it just feels worse. Can't explain why, I think it just feels worse. As your Electro slot, you have a few more options than an Effa. Of course, as I mentioned, you have Fischl. Fischl is an extremely strong substitute for an Effa. If you have her, I would probably recommend using her. Even if she's not C6, if she only buffs 90 EM, that's still more than most other Electro characters can buff Flins. In the past, I actually have used Dory as kind of an interesting option. She has a nice little bit of healing and can be a good defensive slot. She gives flat energy. Of course, that decreases Flins' burst costs and energy needs. Not a great offensive option, but you can get decent defensive use out of her, and of course if you put her on an offensive artifact set, you can squeeze a little bit more use out of her that way. When I was recording, I actually remembered C4 Dory is kind of interesting, giving a 30% energy recharge boost when you have less than 50% energy. Flins is one of the few units in the game who can reliably force himself to have less than 50% energy, so he can actually make use of this buff pretty well. You still have issues with only being able to use her burst every other rotation because of its cooldown, but she does some more interesting energy things for him. And while thinking about Dory, I also remembered another character who buffs energy recharge, Electro Traveler. Electro Traveler can require a little bit of finesse when it comes to Flins picking up the amulets, but given that he now has one extra amulet after the buffs, I think Electro Traveler has become one of Flins' most compelling Electro supports. He just gives a bunch of flat energy and energy recharge buffing with these amulets, and Flins can use that to enable a lot more consistent big bursts. Beto technically functions. I guess she gives a shield at C1, which is some defensive utility, but frankly her energy needs are just too crazy high for me to ever really recommend going with over any other unit. I guess she can kind of be a scuff option for a shielder if you really need it. Ororon, Raiden, and Yai all have decent Electro application off field that can help you get your swirl setups, that can help you get extra particles, although none of them have particularly great damage. Fun fact, Ororon's best set in Nod Cry teams is still Scroll, even though their main sources of damage can't make use of damage bonus. 40% damage bonus is just so much that the few sources that can make use of that damage percent really appreciate it. Flins' infused normals, if you have Columbina going on, her regular Hydro damage gets buffed by damage bonus. So yeah, keep Scroll on your Ororon. Same goes for Eon-san, but generally I don't really like Eon-san when compared to Ororon because she has this 18-second cooldown on her burst, makes Flins rotate a little bit slower, makes everything feel a little bit clunkier and worse. I remember this story. During Flins' initial debut, I was watching a Red Nacio stream. He was running Flins, Sucrose, Ino, Eon-san in Stygian against the Fatui boss. He was sort of struggling because that long cooldown on her burst was extending his rotations unnecessarily. I sent a chat and I was like, hey, why don't you try Ororon? He'll probably feel a little bit better. And he cleared it first try. So there are my general recommendations about Eon-san versus Ororon for Flins. And then I guess Lisa technically functions. It is impossible to get her burst up. She has insane ER needs. And even if you do get her burst up, this insane crazy Def Shred doesn't actually do anything for Flins. So probably not really worth it. Okay, final slot. we can talk about res shredders. Sucrose is the best. Sadly, I can't filter because not only Animo units can be res shredders. Sucrose is the best because not only does she have these insane EM buffs going on in her kit, which that's just a lot of damage bonus going to the entire team, she also has insanely fast animations, so she can really push the lower bound on how fast your rotations can be. She hold TTDS, she buff EM, she go crazy. Everybody knows Sucrose, she's busted. Some other Animo options, you can technically use any of them. Lynette is free, so figure I give her a mention. She also does technically have a full party attack buff in her kit. Not incredibly meaningful, but hey, it is a nice little buff. Otherwise, I would mostly recommend Lanyan in a few specific situations. I've mentioned this in the past, but Flins doesn't really have great defensive options outside of bineffa. A lot of his other defensive options in this slot can be a little bit more scuffed. Like I mentioned, Dory only bursts every other rotation. Kuki doesn't have the best healing, but she can definitely work. She doesn't provide any damage is the issue. Beto technically has a shield, but I already talked about her ER needs. So what you can do, if you don't have bineffa and you're running Fischl in this slot, say, you can outsource your defense to your res shred slot and use Lanyan. Nice shield, big shield, swirl. She can also hold TTDS. She does have an EM buff. It's a lot smaller, but she has a 60 EM buff at C4. Although she kind of has more downside than she used to when comparing to Sucrose, because of course Sucrose activates Hex and Circle Resonance for Fischl, makes Fischl into an insane EM buffer, so you just get far more EM if you run Sucrose instead of Lanyan, but if you're really looking for a defensive slot, Lanyan can fill the slot. Or your other defensive slot in Yehoda. Yehoda is absolutely one of the most interesting units to put in this slot. Not the best, but the most interesting. Unlike your other options for Res Shred, she is a Nod Cry unit. She counts for Ascendant Moongleam, so she frees up these other two slots in your team to be whatever units you want. She also, of course, has her whole absorption thing. She can absorb nearby elements and spit them back out for a pretty long time. She also fills your healing slot. You can get defensive use out of her, although that's also an 18-second cooldown, so she can potentially slow down your rotations. She has a bit of a buff going on in her A4, 100 EM to your on-fielder, and then she has her C6, big crit buff to any Nod Cry units when you fill her treasure flask. Would you believe it? Flins is a Nod Cry unit. Yehoda can be really interesting for enabling the weirder and frankly worse Flins teams. In that Abyss stream that I mentioned before, I was running Yehoda with Dahlia. Dahlia does not have any off-field Hydra application. With Dahlia's Hydra alone, Flins would not be able to get both of his bursts enhanced, but with Yehoda stealing that Hydra up and reapplying it back out onto the enemy, would you look at that? Yehoda's our Hydra applier. You can probably get a decent bit more use out of this with a unit like Mona, using Fischl and Mona in your other slots and using Yehoda to actually guarantee that you have good Hydra uptime and you enhance all of your mini bursts. Or if you really just like Dahlia and you want to use Dahlia in your Flins teams, Yehoda can enable you to do that. And her absorption priority even makes it okay for you to apply Electro too. She prioritizes Hydro, and there we go. Even with bineffa doing her thing, we get a Hydro absorption and Yehoda starts applying Hydro. Yehoda is one of my favorite units for enabling some of the weirder, goofier Flins teams. While she's not standout at anything, she brings a lot of utility to one slot and can open up your other two slots for a lot more of the weirder stuff. And then final shout out to our other res shredders. Durin I already kind of looked at. He's cool, he works. He can't shred Hydro res, so he's mostly good in teams that focus far more on the electro damage aspect of Lunar Charge. When Columbina comes around and starts dealing a bit of damage of her own, Durin kind of falls off. But you can make a lot of interesting teams with Durin and Mona, with Durin and really any other Hydra unit that you really want. Before, I replaced Columbina with Mona to get my double hex, but you could also do the flip thing. You could replace bineffa with Fischl, but of course Durin doesn't even have a hex requirement. He just has hex incentives. He gets a bit better if you run him in double hex, but he's fine to just run in this team with bineffa. In fact, this one is probably a little bit better. This is actually really funny. I'm getting kind of close to my, getting kind of close to the numbers that I could hit with the Sucrose team. I do have Durin Sig that could be affecting things, but it is non-hex Durin Sig, so it's a fair bit weaker. But I am getting extremely close to my DPS that I got with Sucrose. That's really funny. I thought Durin would be, like, significantly worse. But I guess he does enough damage to make up for that. To make up for his lack in buffs. Probably also putting TTDS on Sucrose would have helped her out a little bit more. But yeah, you can see, still a fine team without Durin getting double hex. The last unit that I'd like to talk about is Shilonin. And really, it's just kind of more why you don't use Shilonin. It's really that Flins teams don't make any meaningful use out of Shilonin's strengths. It's mainly that she's easy to play, she can get res shred on all of your elements without really trying at all. You just have to have the right team comp. And then of course the fact that she can hold scroll. Not only can scroll be difficult to proc on both elements, but even if you do proc it on both elements, the team isn't making great use of it because they don't have a ton of regular elemental damage coming through. It's mostly lunar reaction damage. Of course, you could just put her on Instructor and then make her a worse Sucrose, because even the ease at which she can shred res for multiple elements isn't impactful in Electrocharge teams, because you can have Hydro and Electro on an enemy at the same time. It's exceedingly easy to get a swirl on both elements and get your res shredded on both elements. On top of everything, her res shred is just a little bit worse than Animo units is. She gets 36 with a crown skill, whereas Animo units with VV get a fresh 40%. Now, is 4% res shred that big of a difference? No. But it is a difference. So she kind of just becomes numerically worse than most Animo units while not even bringing the quality of life that she's so well known for. You can use her, don't let me stop you. I mean, she can be a very, very comfy healer for the slot if you don't have defensive units, but I would generally advise against Shilonin in Flins teams. I think that's it. I think we're done. I think that's all I have to say. Oh. He's gone. Where did he go? Thank you for sticking with this video. This became much longer than I expected it to be, although I probably should just expect these videos to be longer by this point. And I kind of forgot that, like, this is my YouTube channel and I can use it to promote myself. I stream. I said it a few times during this video. I offhandedly mention it in a lot of other videos, but I stream. I'm on Twitch, I'm on YouTube on this channel. You can check the live tab. I have a stream schedule going on in my Discord if you really want to show up to streams. If you're watching this on the day of Flins and Varka's banners dropping, I will be streaming today. I'm going to be doing viewer polls. I'm going to be doing probably a little bit of Varka testing stuff. I am pulling Albedo, and I'm going to be playing a lot of Albedo. And time to shout out my channel members. DorsalFin1 from twitch.tv/DorsalFin1, Najuro, Rumpaltas, Datiz, ZachZDR, Mudkip1727, Beef Potato, Roberto Desu, Big Soup, Buffalo Milk, DB, Bab, TSI Amat, Maho Shojoruru, Smoothie, Starnova, Pop Roxy, Pyre's Flower, Tay-Day, Aqua, and our newest member who joined to get a funny name color in the Discord, Tylee4897. Welcome in. I know your username is Ancient Gibbs, but YouTube is weird about what name it shows, so I'm just gonna read the name that it shows me here. Thank you, everybody, for supporting the channel. It is greatly appreciated. Thank you to LD Shop for the sponsor. I hope y'all learned something. Have a lovely day.